Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham, and it is time for another episode of Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast, where myself and Andrew Ellis will break down all of the latest in Buckeyes football recruiting news, notes, and anything else that we decide to talk about. Andrew, how are you? How are things? What's new?
Great. It's warm outside, and I got nothing to complain about right now.
You know, it's funny. The last time we did a Talking Stuff, we were in a little bit of, I don't want to say panic mode for people, but it is important to try to stay on top of things. And the last edition of the show we did was the night that Jordan Marshall committed to Michigan, and that the real energy, I guess, that I was trying to give off on that show was to just relax because everything is going to be okay, despite the fact that it hurts to lose a top-ranked player from inside of the Buckeye State, especially to your rival in Michigan. And the player that we talked the most about on that episode was James Peoples from San Antonio, Texas, the four-star running back from Veterans Memorial High School. He visited Ohio State over the weekend. He left town, committed to the Buckeyes after being on campus for about 48 hours. Told me, he couldn't see any other place that he needed to go, any other place he wanted to be. And that commitment is one piece of what seems to be a fairly resurgent Ohio State recruiting machine right now. And by the time that spring ends, Andrew, and we'll probably do another episode of Talking Stuff before the spring game next week, but on the live show from Roosters on Monday, I said I wouldn't be surprised if the Buckeyes had a dozen commitments by the time spring ends. Right now, they are at 7. We could be in for a pretty good little run here for the Buckeyes fans. And since you are the voice of the fan, or that's what I try to have you be on this show, like, are you feeling better?
Yeah, I mean, I think all along we kind of were saying it wasn't realistic for them to get Peoples and Jordan Marshall. So if anybody really had that in their heads, that was probably it wasn't going to happen. So getting one of those guys is great. Obviously, the Marshall thing is still a loss, but I'm a huge James Peoples fan myself. I love the shiftiness and the spin moves, all that stuff in his highlight tape. Obviously, playing against great competition, but like you said, this all seems to be building up to the spring game weekend, and it seems like there's a lot going on right now, which is vastly different from what we were talking about in January and February. So things are heating up.
Yeah, and then we tried to say it then, like that was by design for Ohio State. They did not want to have people coming to campus in the middle of winter when there wasn't football going on, when there wasn't a lot to do. It's not like taking kids to an Ohio State basketball game is the world's greatest energy builder. You know what I mean? Like those games are not exactly at this point, unfortunately, not very exciting to go to. So there's not a lot of value to be added by having junior days and stuff like that when there's basketball games on campus. There is much more positivity to be found when you have a kid in town when the Buckeyes are doing football practices and football meetings and getting to see campus, in the springtime where there's people outside and all that stuff. So it is by design. I know it kind of frustrates people at times to think that it seems like Ohio State's being somewhat more lackadaisical than other schools are, but that's just the plan. So you can, I guess, argue if that plan is good or bad, but that is the plan. So it is going according to that. Before we really launch into what is expected over the next 10 days or so, let's circle back to the running back position, because we do know Ohio State still wants another one in this class, at least one. And I wouldn't be surprised, the more I hear from people, the more I see things, if they tried to find a way to get 3 players who could play that position in this class, including Sam Williams-Dixon, who will be back at Ohio State for the spring game on April 15th. That'll be his 3rd visit this spring. I do not see him committing anywhere else at this point. I would expect that you would see a decision from him on the 15th or 16th of this month, provided he returns to the spring game like he expects to. And it looks like that's heading in Ohio State's direction. He can play other positions. I've talked about it. He can play defense. He can play in the slot. He can do a lot of other stuff. But if you're looking at whether or not Ohio State is interested in another tailback, another pure tailback, someone like Jordan Lyle out of St. Thomas Aquinas in Florida, or DeJuan Williams from Baltimore or St. Francis Academy, those are 2 names that are still very real and worth watching. Have you had a chance to check these kids out at all? And if you have, what are your thoughts?
I like that Williams kid from Maryland. Just obviously, just based on the highlight tape that I watched, that anybody can watch. But in a dream world, you can sign James Peoples. You bring in Sam Williams Dixon as an athlete who can play running back, and then you get one of those other two guys that you've talked about. Or it could end up being some guy we're not even talking about right now. So I think if Tony Alford can pull that off between now and December or February, then you're looking at a nice little resurgence after not getting a single guy in the class of 2023.
Yeah, and the calculus completely changes because of people's announcement and the timing of it. If he had gone through this last weekend's visit and then went to Oklahoma like he was expecting to do this weekend, and then visit Texas for the spring game like he was expecting on April 15th, and then took an official visit to Oklahoma in June, and then took his official visit to Ohio State, like you could see a scenario where Ohio State was feeling probably a little less optimistic about things. But now you have leverage if you're the Buckeyes and you're Tony Alford, where if Jordan Lyle is the guy you prefer, or if DeJuan Williams is the player you prefer, or anyone else around the country, it is much easier to make that phone call right now to Jordan Lyle to say, hey, by the way, DeJuan Williams was here last week, the same days you were, and he's returning on April 15th for the spring game with his teammates from St. Francis, including a couple highly ranked defensive backs that Ohio State's very, very high on. So, Jordan, if you're interested in being that second running back in this class, there might be some impetus for you to move quickly. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I would not be surprised if that's a phone call that has been made already, because it makes sense. Ohio State loves St. Thomas Aquinas. They love the speed and the program that they have down in Fort Lauderdale. It's one of the best in the country. But St. Francis out of Baltimore is also one of the best in the country. So you're looking for a really productive back to come in and be a part of a 2 or 3 man monster, essentially, with Sam Williams Dixon and James Peoples. And as you said, after not signing a running back last year, after signing down Hayden in 2022, who now looks like he could be a 3-year guy in college, it's pretty darn important to sign as many quality players as you can in this class.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. They've got a lot to sell right now, and I don't know if anything's going to happen quickly outside of the Sam Williams Dixon situation. But if they can get another one of those guys, I mean, that's kind of the dream scenario right now. So we'll see.
It's a good time to be Tony Alford. People are been pretty rough on him over the last few years. At times it's justifiable. At times probably it's a little bit overblown. But the reality is that he continues to be elite at relationship building with kids around the country. It's clear as day when you see the quotes from James Peoples about him and the way that he felt about Tony Alford heading into the trip and then committing as soon as he was on campus. It seems pretty clear. Now, talking about guys being on campus, I think the big story people are wanting to know about or where things are is with Air Noland, the quarterback from Langston Hughes High School in Fairburn, Georgia. Visited Ohio State over the April 1st weekend, was offered by Ohio State over the April 1st weekend. That, Andrew, seems to be what, is interesting, I guess, to people. The fascinating thing with Air Noland, who is scheduled to commit this Saturday, April the 8th, is that I don't know that any school is really saying, dude, we need you to commit right away. Like, I don't even think he may very well commit to Ohio State on Saturday, but I don't think the Buckeyes are pushing commit right away, committing right now. We need you. We need you. We need you. Everyone would like to have that opportunity to see the whole field, but it's fascinating to me that Noland, as soon as his Ohio State visit was over, was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, right? And Alabama has Julian Sayin committed, the 5-star quarterback from Carlsbad, California. There are some rumblings. I don't know. I'm not trying to pretend like I'm an Alabama insider guy or whatever, but I've heard that there are actually some parts of the Alabama offensive staff that prefer Noland over Sayin. I don't know if that's true. You never know what's true in this space if you don't hear it directly from the people involved. But like Alabama almost certainly is telling him, hold off, hold off, hold off. Don't commit, don't commit, don't commit. And if that happened, I think it would actually not be a bad thing for Ohio State. I mean, if he commits to Ohio State on Saturday, it's a huge win. And it's great for the Buckeyes. But if he decides to hold off, which again is only being speculated, not being even hinted at by him or anyone else around him, like that'd be very interesting to see how things unfold from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no secret that Julian Sayin is the top guy for Ohio State. And if if you had any kind of inclination that he's about to make a trip to campus or that he's got a visit set up or anything like that, then that would drastically change the way they're kind of the way things are going with Noland, I think. Like, I mean, would they? I don't want to say they wouldn't have offered him, but he's got a decision coming on Saturday. And you mentioned, I don't know if he wants to speed up the process because he's just not a fan of the recruiting process, or if he wants to be a leader for his class, or whatever the reason might be. Ohio State's in a spot now to where, I mean, unless he delays things, they're going to have an answer on Saturday. And he doesn't, from what I've heard, he's not the type of kid that's going to back out of a commitment. Obviously, I have no idea. I've never talked to him or any of these guys before, but I'm very curious to see what happens there because I don't know. I don't know if Julian Sayin has communicated with the staff at all about his intentions or anything. I'm just speculating. If they had the feeling he was coming to campus, I feel like that would drastically change the way this quarterback recruiting is going, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that of the schools that Air Noland is looking at closely, from what we read and speculate, what he said is there's Arkansas, there's Miami, there's Ohio State, there's Texas A&M. Texas A&M has a quarterback committed already, and so I don't think that he's worried about that because I don't think they'd be at the top of his list if he were. So clearly, he probably wouldn't be worried about Alabama having a quarterback committed either if that was part of the decision. That said, Alabama signed 2 quarterbacks a year ago with Eli Holstein and Dylan
Lonergan, was it?
Lonergan.
There you go.
But the difference is the player committed to Texas A&M is a 3-star quarterback from Mississippi, and Julian Sayin is the 5-star number 2 ranked quarterback in the country. And then there's Georgia, right? I mean, this kid's in Georgia's backyard, but Georgia hasn't really pushed for him because they have Ryan Puglisi committed. But Georgia also appears to still be very much in the hunt for Dylan Raiola, who, if Raiola decided to commit to Georgia, Puglisi likely becomes a real option for Ohio State or someone else. So there's all these moving parts. And I do think that the timing of Noland's decision is fascinating in that every one of those schools would accept a commitment from him on Saturday. But I don't think anyone is saying, yes, make sure you commit right away, because everyone is still aware of the fact that in the year 2023, there are moving parts all over the place that are worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And we know that quarterback recruiting is a lot different than other positions and whatnot. But I typically, in a situation like this, if you're Ohio State, if you're not offering this kid until a week before his announcement and you're, a fan of recruiting, you're probably thinking, it's too late. But they've done a really good job building this relationship up to this point, even without the offer in hand. So I don't know. Like, it seemed like Miami was confident for a bit there. I've kind of gotten the vibe that maybe Texas A&M is maybe the top threat despite having another kid committed. And then the fact that Alabama offered Noland after Sayin was already committed, like, you wonder, do they kind of feel like something might be up with Julian Sayin, or do they, like you said, just have some staff members that prefer Noland? So I don't know. This is fascinating, and I feel like it's going to last much longer than this Saturday, and we're probably in store for some twists and turns.
Yeah, one of the things about Noland is that he is an extremely likable kid. There's no one around the country that I've ever spoken to that doesn't just love his personality, what he brings to the table. Jeremiah Smith plays with him on the South Florida Express 7-on-7 team at times, likes playing alongside him, is active in the recruitment. I don't think Ohio State would have felt compelled to offer if they weren't ready to take him in the class. They saw him throw in January, didn't offer at that time, but there is a sense that they basically from January to now have just been like, let's get the relationship going. If you're serious about Ohio State, Air, you'll come visit on your own dime. You'll figure out if this is the place for you. And then we can talk about how serious you really are about Ohio State. And then Ohio State will be more serious about you. That's obviously now happened. So the bottom line is we're 4 days away from his decision, unless it gets delayed, which again, there's no indication that that's coming. Miami was obviously very confident. He announced his decision the day after he returned from a visit to Miami, announced that he had a date set in mind. Generally, that bodes well for the team you just left. But if you read things and hear things about Noland, he's been telling people for the last month, I already know where I'm going. So none of the timing of those things that would normally be tea leaves that you'd have to pay a lot of attention to are sort of thrown out the window because he admittedly said, hey, I already knew where I was going a month ago. So Does that bode well for Ohio State? I tend to think it does. I really do believe at this point, if that decision happens this Saturday, I think it will be Ohio State. But that is based more on just big picture evaluation of what everyone has to offer as far as the roster, as far as the players that are in the class, what they're hearing and feeling and saying. Obviously, Jelani Thurman, Ohio State tight end, is a former teammate of his. A teammate, Jacob Good, was up on campus at Ohio State as a cornerback that has an offer from the Buckeyes 2 weeks ago. Like, Buckeyes have done a really good job at Langston Hughes. I think it's going to go Ohio State's way if he commits on Saturday. But again, he was at Alabama on Monday. So where else is he going to go this week? What else is going to happen as far as who else is going to try to get involved? Miami, obviously, we know in the NIL space, plays a different style of game than Ohio State. So does Texas A&M. But then you're also reading about Life Wallet being basically a shell company and not lasting anymore. So there's a lot of things in play. Bottom line, I think at this point, Ohio State may be the team to beat heading into Saturday. So we'll see. As I apologize, my throat seems to not be wanting to work. What's the next topic, Andrew? What else is on your mind?
So I think last time we've talked a lot about offense. Seems like there's been a lot happening with offense, and people want to know like what's happening with the defense and when are they going to start to get some other defensive commits, that kind of thing. It seems like over the last 3 or 4 days, the biggest thing that's been going on has been some of those top cornerback targets coming to campus. You have, Bryce West and Aaron Scott both on campus early this week. I think Bryce West might still be there. I think he extended his visit a little bit. And then Xavier Brown, the kid from California, is on campus. And those are 3 of the priority guys at cornerback for Tim Walton. So
and Charles
that's
Lester.
kind of all been – yeah, and Charles Lester too. Gosh, forgot about him. So that seems to be really picking up. I don't know if it doesn't seem like any of those guys are like particularly in a hurry to make a decision. I think Brown's coming back. Like, is he doing 2 trips in 1 week or something? Is that what it is?
Yeah, he was there over the April 1st weekend with players. I think it's part of the South Florida Express group. Somehow The guy in California is with South Florida Express. I don't know. But yeah, he's returning next week prior to the spring game. Not going to be there for the spring game weekend, but heading back to town with his mother midweek. That's pretty rare for a kid from California to make 2 trips in 10 days.
Right. So I don't know. Like if you could finish a cornerback class with the 2 in-state guys, Scott and West, and then add somebody like Xavier Brown, that'd be an A+ class for Tim Walton, I think. And then of course you got guys like the kid in Arizona, what is it, Miles Lockhart or whatever his name is down there, and obviously Charles Lester too, if you want to shoot for the stars. But business has kind of been picking up on the cornerback front, I'd say, over the last few days. So
you're going to shoot for the stars. You're going to swing as far as as hard as you can at the best players in the country. So when you have Charles Lester, who is the number 1 ranked cornerback in the nation, making his 2nd trip to Ohio State, the official visit's already scheduled for June. Like, that this kid is serious about Ohio State. I don't care about all of the crystal balls and all of the future casts and all that stuff, putting him as a sure thing to Florida State. I just don't buy it. I mean, he's being recruited by Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama. There is no way, if he's still visiting Ohio State and Georgia and Alabama, that he's a sure thing for Florida State. I know that Florida State's a resurgent program. They're doing a good job recruiting, but you can see clearly that the kid has real interest in Ohio State. So I think Tim Walton deserves a heck of a lot of credit for what he's done so far in this cycle. Now, that means nothing because none of them are committed. But as you said, like when you have Aaron Scott and Bryce West and Miles Lockhart and Xavier Brown and Charles Lester as guys where you could take 3 of those 5, that's a big, big cycle for Tim Walton. And there's at least an argument to be made that he could land 4 of those 5, whether or not it's Charles Lester or Xavier Brown or Miles Lockhart. I don't know, but I still think that Aaron Scott and Bryce West, despite all of the conversation about Michigan, despite the conversation about USC and Oregon and all these other schools, Tennessee, it is really hard for me to envision a scenario where both those 2 don't end up at Ohio State. Bryce West is a player that Ohio State has recruited for 2 years. Aaron Scott is a player that they prioritized and offered very early in this process. Ohio State is not taking those conversations or recruitments for granted at all. Like, those kids are getting recruited as hard as any players around the country. And I don't think that there's been any sort of hiccups that would indicate like of the ball being dropped like there was, I suppose, in the recruitment of Jordan Marshall. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the same thing. It's not apples to apples.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. And then also Kobe Black down in Texas. I mean, there's got to be five or so guys that they're in a good spot for, and if you can snag three or four of them, then I think the perception on Tim Walton might change a little bit. Obviously, they got to show some stuff on the field this fall too, though. But it seems like cornerback recruiting's in a good spot, even with nobody quite committed yet, I guess. So
Yeah, I would be. The thing with the guy like Xavier Brown, I've talked to him. He's not very forthcoming with his thoughts about things, but he is clearly serious about his process. He's already down to 4 schools. It's Ohio State, it's Alabama, it's USC, and Oregon. Ohio State was the only place he'd not been. He's now been there once and will be there twice when he arrives again next week. I wouldn't be surprised if he decides to shut things down by the end of spring. So that is a real one to watch with West and Scott. I guess I'm still anticipating probably summertime decision for Aaron Scott, and the expectation has and has always been for Bryce West a November decision probably. But the Buckeyes are in a really good spot there. They are doing things a little bit different though in the recruiting. Like this isn't a conversation where you're having your Bryce West, who's on campus Monday and Tuesday this week. The reason he's there for 2 extra days is so he can sit in on meetings, so he can be a part of the players, figure out the players' atmosphere, figure out how he fits, because Ohio State is not going to sit there and blow smoke up any part of it, really. The goal is this is a serious decision you're about to make, and you need to be thinking about and focused on the right things. Coming in here, how do you fit in this defense? How do you fit in with the guys here? It's not about photo shoots. It's not about, anything else. It's not about rankings. It's about, are you serious about playing football at Ohio State? Are you serious about what you want to do with football? And as much as Bryce really enjoyed his trip to USC, as much as he liked Oregon, he's from Cleveland, Ohio, and plays at Glenville High School. Everything that these kids want in their college experience is an hour away from home, and they don't need to go anywhere else to get it. Now, if they want to keep playing the game and see other places and do other things for the old reasons, the old Glenville reasons, which is how it helps open the door for other kids, great. Mo Douglas down at Springfield has a similar philosophy as Ted Ginn, which is, hey, you can help other guys get attention if you are active in this realm. At some point, the real things become the real things, and I don't know when it'll happen, but I don't think that there's a situation where Ohio State is going to tell those kids you're running out of time, because they won't do that to in-state kids like that. But B, they're also not taking those things for granted. As I said, like these are real recruitments, and there's going to be a lot of misdirection. There's going to be a lot of noise. There's going to be a lot of investigating other things. But at the end of the day, there's nothing that Ohio State offers that other schools don't.
I'm kind of trying to picture in my head what the fan base reaction would be if Ohio State signed Charles Lester, Xavier Brown, and then Kobe Black, and then lost Bryce West and Aaron Scott to Michigan. Like, I know that I don't expect that to happen. I'm just kind of like envisioning how the general reaction would go if that were to happen. Because that'd just be
some men, Master Bruce, just like to watch the world burn. I don't think anyone should root for that. Kobe Black, he visited 2 weeks ago. I like him as a player. That's going to be a hard sell for Ohio State. So my hope for everyone's sake is that the scenario you just created does not happen. Despite the fact that talent-wise, it would certainly be equated for the Buckeyes if that occurred. But
do you think any Michigan outlets would make a huge deal about that?
I believe that they probably would.
Yeah,
but that's the way it goes. I mean, the reality is they need, every school is looking for any advantage it can find in the PR world, right? So
right.
Now, I read on 11 Warriors on Tuesday, somebody wrote about the fact that Michigan signed 22 players from Ohio since 2016, and only 2 had an Ohio State offer. Like, that is the way of the beast right now. Michigan is going to trumpet their wins, even if it's not kids that have Ohio State offers. Doesn't mean they're not really good players. I mean, I think that's the unfortunate thing that happens here, is because Ohio State hasn't offered a player or 2 that Michigan has a commitment from, that there is some part of the Ohio State fan base, these guys aren't any good. And that's just not the case. They're really good players. They're just not the right fit for Ohio State, or not what Ohio State recruits at a certain position. A player like Luke Hamilton, Ohio State saw a lot of times, and they decided to go the other direction. So Ben Roebuck, same thing. It's not a knock on those players. It's just a different style of recruiting and a different style of player. Those are really good players and really good people. It's unfortunate that they get used as sort of pawns in this like back and forth PR game, because they don't need to be. The players should be celebrating their decision. Michigan should be celebrating the wins, but doesn't have to turn it into like a take as many pot shots as you can at Ohio State when they didn't offer. Like, it doesn't make sense. Anyway.
Right. So
soapbox.
Real quick, sticking in the secondary just real quick, and a much more likely situation. Reggie Powers was offered, what was that, a couple weeks back, maybe? Safety, kind of maybe linebacker eventually. Is it just kind of waiting game right now to see when that one pops? Is that kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Reggie was on spring break. So like he got offered by Ohio State on Saturday, the 25th, and went on spring break to Florida with his mother on the 26th. So like the next day was flying to Florida to begin his spring break. I don't know exactly how long it takes, but it would be a very real surprise if Ohio State was not the choice. He is a safety in the Buckeyes' eyes, a guy that can play the deep safety, but he's also a hitter. I don't know have you watched his tape? Like, that dude is violent.
Yeah, he's
like,
yeah, it is.
The idea of a player like him and Malik Hartford, if you just want to talk about two dudes that like to hit across the middle of the field, Reggie Powers and Malik Hartford from the Dayton area, those are guys that bring the wood. Reggie's up to almost 200 pounds. Like, this is an athlete that is 3-star right now, according to most services. But I'm telling you, at 6'1", 200 pounds, the way he hits, running a 4.7, it's been hand timed at 4.55. So, I mean, hand timed is what hand timed is. But he's a player that's going to be really good in like 3 or 4 years. But he's a perfect representative for Ohio State on and off the field. And I think the Buckeyes fans should be excited that he's been offered. I know there's some debate about, why offer him instead of Coy Beasley down at Cincinnati LaSalle, or, again, it's not to say Coy Beasley's not a good player. It's just what Ohio State's looking for is different. And Reggie Powers, who was on campus at Ohio State in January, is one of like 5 kids in the state who was there for a junior day, a small junior day that included the Armstrong twins and Mark Nave and Reggie Powers. Like, that was a pretty telling sign at the time that Ohio State was very serious about what they thought Reggie Powers could be. I'm a little surprised that the offer came out as early as it did, simply because of the fact that he was in no hurry, and you could have maybe waited until June to see him on campus again for a camp and just make sure. But this is where we, as analysts or evaluators or whatever, have to sort of take an ego check, and our opinion does not really matter. Like, the coaches at Ohio State evaluated him last summer. They evaluated him through the season. They evaluated him in the winter and decided this is our guy. So people should be happy about it. The comparison that I've heard from folks about Reggie Powers is Christian Bryant. So if you're looking for, why does Ohio State offer this kid early? If they see that sort of upside, who's one of the best safeties at Ohio State in the last 20 years, that's a pretty lofty comparison. And I think people should be excited about it whenever he decides to make a decision. If it's not Ohio State, then something has gone terribly wrong since the offer. But I would be shocked if it's not the Buckeyes. And again, that's one where we're talking, if it's not happened by the end of spring, then there seems to, maybe someone's phone stopped working or whatever.
Right. Okay. So moving up the position groups, not going to spend a ton of time at linebacker. Peyton Pierce, I think he loves James Laurinaitis. He was at Tennessee. He's going to be back at Notre Dame. Still feels like Laurinaitis is going to win that one. You would agree with that, I assume?
Yeah, it's a simple situation. And it's the year 2023. I get it. People are going, why don't you just cancel flights? You can get your refunds. It's not always the case. Some flights you buy are non-refundable. These flights were paid for months ago, and the family wants to honor the coaches that they talked to and the visits that they'd already planned. I don't know if Peyton Pierce will be committed by the end of spring, but again, if we were to have like a running checklist of players that could be committed by the end of spring, I'd put him at the top of the list. And barring something strange happening, the relationship that he has with James Laurinaitis is going to be almost impossible for other schools to overcome. And I know he's very high on Notre Dame. I know he liked, Florida State. I know he's got really good family ties to Oklahoma. This is just a situation where I think Ohio State fans have gotten it in their head that the Buckeyes can't win these relationship battles on defense. And not to put too much pressure on James Laurinaitis, but James Laurinaitis is capable of doing what Brian Hartline has done for wide receivers on defense and at linebacker. So I really think that people need to wrap their minds around the fact that James Laurinaitis is going to win a lot of the battles that he's involved in. Maybe he's not going to win them all. He's probably not going to win Sammy Brown, the 5-star player from Georgia, who it's going to be very hard to get him away from Clemson. But Sammy and his family are talking about coming back to Ohio State. He's been growing his relationship with Laurinaitis. He's got an official visit to Ohio State planned in June. Will he get to that visit without committing? I guess that's up in the air. But between Garrett Stover and Peyton Pierce and Kingston Viamuasa out there at St. John Bosco in California, there's 3 really good players that Ohio State could sign at linebacker in this class. And, still a ways to go with Kingston. But I don't see any other school in a better position than Ohio State right now. Not to say the Buckeyes are in the lead or anything like that. Because he's certainly not going to say that, but I don't think that they are trailing anybody else at this point either.
Right. That sounds about right. I want to make sure we have time for the defensive line, because last time we talked,
we have all the time in the world.
Yeah. The people spoke and said, what the heck's going on with Larry Johnson? What's going on with the defensive line? And we've talked about this ad nauseum, that he just kind of marches to the beat of his own drum. He handles things differently. You really never know unless it's like a Damon Wilson or Keon Keeley, you really don't know who the priorities are at most times. So I guess just big picture wise, there's not a lot going on right now, but there's guys coming in. There was some crystal ball or future cast, whatever activity for for Dylan Stewart the other week. Dylan Stewart. I've personally kind of always viewed that in the Damon Wilson light, or at least now I do, because there's now some Ohio State chatter. I just assume this kid from, the DMV area, Washington, D.C., I just assume he's going to play in the SEC, probably for a school like Georgia. There's been a lot of Ohio State chatter lately. So is that, in your mind, something people should get excited about, or just kind of file it under the believe it when you see it category?
I mean, I think it can be both, if you're being honest. The reality is, if Damon Wilson was from the DMV, that pre-existing relationship with Larry Johnson probably would have carried into Ohio State. I mean, Larry Johnson is a legend in that area. That cannot be discounted. The fact that Dylan Stewart came to Ohio State, had a great time, immediately scheduled an official visit, is telling people, the right things, like, that's positive. So I don't think people should instinctively go to a place of negativity and say, well, hey, this is going to end the same way, because Larry Johnson is the same coach that recruited Chase Young when it's not like the Bosas, right? So Nick Bosa and Joey Bosa, their family is born and bred Buckeyes. Like, that was an easy recruitment for those 2 5-stars. But Chase Young, Ohio State had to beat Alabama for Chase Young. Who's a good boy? They had to beat Alabama for Chase Young. There's no reason that Larry Johnson can't do that, especially when you consider the fact that the Buckeyes didn't sign a true defensive end in the class of 2023, and that depth chart is wide open in 2024. So there's a good reason to feel good about Dylan Stewart. That said, he was immediately back at Georgia. He's Alabama, Georgia. This is big boy football. If Ohio State can't win those battles sometimes, they're never going to win those games. So the Buckeyes need to do what they have to do to win it.
I think with him, the only thing that kind of gives me a glimmer of hope, well, obviously being in the DMV and Larry Johnson, that's positive news in itself. But I think I read that he's planning to decide this summer. Like, he's not going to be going to drag it out into December or even February. So I don't know. For some reason, that gives me a bit more optimism than somebody who's going to has a chance to visit Georgia. I mean, I guess he could still visit. I don't know. For some reason, the timing of it just kind of gives me a little bit of hope on that one, but I don't know.
Yeah, because the kids that are preemptively saying, I'm waiting until signing day, because we've been somewhat, I think, hurt. I say that not from a personal hurt, but I mean, like, Ohio State has been.
I've been personally hurt. No, I'm just kidding.
Right. I mean, Ohio State's been negatively impacted by the kids who are perceived to be chasing NIL money to the end of the process, right? If a kid is saying, I'm committing in the summer, then you at least have a sense that he's maybe not solely interested in that pursuit. Now, that is, of course, not to say that he's the only defensive lineman Ohio State is interested in. There are a lot of kids who Ohio State talks to. Edric Houston, a 5-star ranked strong side defensive end from Buford High School in Georgia. He's coming up this Friday. He's coming up with his aunt. It's just a visit, he told me, because he wants to visit Ohio State and get to know more about school, because his last visit, which was for the Notre Dame game in September, all he got to do was really do the game time stuff. So the fact that this kid is coming up on a holiday weekend by himself with his family and not part of a large traveling group, and not like, those are indicators that he's serious about Ohio State. In fact, when I did my most recent like class prediction, which was back in February, Edric Houston was a guy who I had in the class for Ohio State. Yeah. I know that people get panicked and say, oh, he's from Georgia. He's 90 miles away from Athens. If there's one high school in Georgia that is a little bit different, it's Buford. Those kids are not beholden to the Bulldogs. I understand Georgia is Georgia, and they should be obviously considered the biggest threat to any recruitment in America right now, but you have a chance. That is not a pie in the sky, wasting your time type of endeavor for Ohio State. Beyond that, I mean, there are plenty of other players on the defensive line. Aiden Breland from Mater Dei out in California. That's a real recruitment for Ohio State as a defensive tackle. Justin Scott, Ohio State is still very much in the mix there. They've been trying to get him back on campus for the spring game because he was initially supposed to visit Georgia for an official visit on April 15th, but now he's taking an official visit to Georgia in June. The question is whether or not he's going to go down to Georgia for an unofficial visit on the 15th or go to Ohio State for their spring game. So the Buckeyes are trying to work that out. But Ernest Willer down at IMG, that's a real guy. The kid at in St. Louis, whose name is escaping me at the moment, I don't remember. He was just there.
I was going to say Light. Isn't that Lightfoot?
No,
right?
Lightfoot's from Chicago. Marquise Lightfoot, like, that's a real guy. Booker Pickett is a real guy. That's 6'6", 200 pounds. Booker Pickett is an athlete that Ohio State could maybe see at the jack position, and not just as a pure edge, but he's a guy that, like, Ohio State fans need to pay attention to him and realize that he's as serious about Ohio State as the Buckeyes are about him. Why is I'm sorry, now I have to look. Kamarion Franklin, a 5-star defensive end from Mississippi, he's coming up for the spring game. So there's guys out there that are very much in the picture for Ohio State, and it's not a situation where I don't think Larry Johnson's past allows you to just assume that he's going to sign a great class, because last year felt disappointing in many ways. But he still signed the number 1 ranked defensive tackle in the country, according to Rivals, with Jason Moore. He still signed a very, very productive and very highly ranked player from Atlanta in Caden McDonald. Joshua Mickens, the edge rusher that was committed to LSU, who signed, I mean, he still did a fine job. But now, knowing that JT Tuimoloau will be gone after this year, the odds are Jack Sawyer could take the same sort of leap, even though he's been less productive than Tuimoloau has to this point in his career. The size, the speed, all those things that Jack has are going to make him appealing. Ohio State has, much like we're talking about at running back, with nobody signed in 23, like there's a lot to offer defensive ends. And so whether it's Dylan Stewart, whether it's Booker Pickett, whether it's Darian Mayo from Good Counsel High School and out of Baltimore, whether it's Marquise Lightfoot, like there's dudes out there, and Larry Johnson's way has not changed, despite, and maybe that's part of the problem. And we've talked about that before. Like, the game is changing. His way of doing things hasn't. And it feels like he's fallen behind. But in the relationship space, when the kids get on campus, Larry Johnson is still the best of the best.
Yeah, I think just from the fan perspective, you just have to, if you see all these wide receivers and quarterbacks and running backs coming in the class, and you just kind of freak out because there's no defensive lineman coming, just take a deep breath and remember that he kind of handles things a bit differently than many others on the coaching staff, I guess. So,
yeah. And people, I mean, I understand people want to see results and they want to see, the big splash names. But if you look at it from just the big picture perspective, with Edric Houston's visit this week, with Dylan Stewart visiting, with the kid in St. Louis, whose name, why is his name?
I know who you're talking about. He's viewed as an Oklahoma lean right now.
Yeah.
It's the same one I'm talking about. It's a hard last name to pronounce.
It's not. I hate when I can't think of a name. I'm trying to look it up, and I'm not even seeing it on our list of offers on Rivals.com. But either way, it doesn't matter. He visited 2 weeks ago. He was there on campus the same day Dylan Stewart was. Can you find that for me while you're looking?
Yeah. Are you talking about Oh God, Adeboju Adebawari. Adebawari.
No,
That weird
no,
name.
I'm
That's not who
not.
you're talking about. That's who I'm.
No,
That's who
I'm
I'm
talking
talking
about.
about because he visited recently.
No, I'm talking about. Sorry, folks. This is riveting.
The only other, the
Podcasting
only
here.
other
Sure.
edge, the only other edge name that I know in Oklahoma is that Bradley, that
He's
Chandavian
not.
Bradley
He's
kid.
not in Oklahoma. He's in St.
Sorry,
Louis.
I meant Missouri. Sorry,
He's in,
these guys are in Missouri.
no, it's I'm just. This is really, really riveting. I understand people are
Yeah,
loving this right now.
I probably have no idea who you're talking about. Then
Williams,
because,
William and Winari, Nawiri, Waneri, Williams Waneri from Lee's Summit in St. Louis. He's a high 4-star, top 50 player in the country, according to pretty much everyone. He was on campus, 6'6", like big kid. Like I think 247 Sports has him as their number one ranked defensive lineman. In fact, according, and Dylan Stewart on 3 Sports has him as the number one ranked defensive lineman. So there are a lot of options out there to make a splash, and Larry Johnson just has to hit those home runs. And again, this week you have Edric Houston. Next week there's Kamarion Franklin from Lake Coromant, Mississippi, who is the number 2 ranked strong side defensive end according to Rivals. Like all these big names are coming to town, so now it's just about finishing the task for Larry Johnson.
Yeah, that makes sense. That name that I said was a 2023 kid, so I'm an idiot. People can just ignore me. So anyway,
well, let's not ignore you. But I get it. People we constantly see we're talking so much about quarterbacks and wide receivers, and people are like, "Where's the defense? Does Ohio State want to play defense?" Everyone is terrified that Ohio State is going to turn into Alex Grinch's Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley's Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley's USC, where it's all offense all the time and no defense.
Right.
Ohio State is certainly aware of the fact that they need to recruit really good defensive players and are doing their best to make that happen. The problem simply is that there aren't always a lot of those players in the Midwest. And so when you lose that recruiting ground and you have to basically go into the heart of SEC country to pull these kids out, that is not easy, period. The SEC, for as annoying as it is the best conference in football and has won 18 of the last 20 national championships or something stupid. So these are battles Ohio State has to win, but then once they win them, they have to win national championships to keep winning them. So it's all sort of tied in together. What else we got? We're talking about wide receivers, right? Got to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, we can. I think we both think that Mylan Graham could potentially pop at any time. The highly rated kid from Fort Wayne area. He was back. I don't think he was expected back on campus. He seems like he's kind of like lurks in the shadows, doesn't talk a lot.
He's a ninja. He's a ninja. He does not announce his moves.
Yeah. So, but he's there 2 weekends in a row. It seems like now. Is that right?
It wasn't 2 weekends in a row. It was 2 out of 3 weeks. But for Mylan, Ohio State was the first offer, and Brian Hartline has never let up. And now everyone around the country sees what Brian Hartline saw last year. His tape is filthy. It's just filthy what he does. He's as good a high school route runner as any high school receiver I've ever seen on tape. I'm not that evaluator guy, but it's pretty clear to see. 6'1", 175. I mean, he is Chris Olave-esque in so many ways. And also a really, really good special teams guy, good kick returner. And it seems like if you can get a commitment from Mylan Graham before spring ends, which I think he will announce. Purdue seems to be the team, believe it or not. People out there scoffing probably with Purdue, but Purdue is probably the team that Ohio State has to beat there. They've done a really good job recruiting him. Even though Tennessee, Alabama, Michigan, and others are involved, it seems like he wants to stay close to home. And Ohio State and Purdue are probably the 2 front runners. I would expect it to be Ohio State whenever he announces. You couple him with Jeremiah Smith, you have a really, really good starting point for the class of 2024 at wide receiver. And then you have potentially Jeremiah McClellan from Christian Brothers College High School, which is so confusing. Why do schools do that? Like university, college, high school.
So weird.
What are we doing? Let's just say Christian Brothers, okay? Can we just do that, please, St. Louis? Jeremiah McClellan is a highly ranked 4-star, perfect fit for the slot at Ohio State. Same high school as Cam Babb and Cam Brown. There's a a lot of momentum there. He visited Ohio State on the weekend of the 25th, and I put in a future cast prediction for him to Ohio State that night, just based on things I'd heard from people. He released a top 12 or something on Monday. That's irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's really 3 or 4 schools in the mix: Notre Dame, Missouri, Ohio State, and then a pick 'em across the country somewhere else. This is where recruiting momentum, to go back to the top of the show, like, begins to have an impact. Because if Jeremiah Smith and Miles Graham are committed, the guy who wants to be the third receiver in Ohio State's class of likely 3 receivers better move quickly. So that is the leverage that Ohio State and Brian Hartline will have, presuming that Milan Graham makes his decision sometime in the near future. The only other player to talk about or really watch, I think, in that slot right now, other than JoJo Trader, who I'm not even going to mention because that recruitment's going to go till November or December, and anything can happen. And no matter how many other players Ohio State has at receiver, it doesn't matter. If JoJo Trader wants in, you take him. The other guy is this kid, Xavier Jordan from California, who visited a week ago. Really good film. Ohio State is high on him. He came to campus, left with an offer, and he's a name to kind of watch. It could be a race to the finish between him and Jeremiah McClellan to see who wants to take that other spot. Sort of like last summer with Rico Flores and Carnell Tate and Noah Rogers. Like, who's gonna take it? We saw Carnell Tate and Noah Rogers jump into the class before Rico Flores had a chance, and he ended up having to sign with Notre Dame. So there's a lot of very positive things happening for Ohio State recruiting. And I know in a time where it feels easy to be negative, people should be pretty thrilled about the trajectory of the 2024 class right now. Any final thoughts from you, Andrew?
No, I mean, it just seems like we could be on the verge of a bit of a commitment barrage here in the next 2 to 3 weeks or so, which is exciting. Especially after the world ended when Michigan landed Jordan Marshall. That was fun. Do you, for the people, want to do a couple names in or out?
Sure. I love doing that game.
I know it's always been your favorite game besides Wheel of Fortune.
I am awesome at Wheel of Fortune. If you're watching Wheel of Fortune executive producers and you need someone to come in there and just kick your game's ass, I am the guy to do it. I'm not even afraid. I will go on TV. I will kill your game on TV. Wheel of Fortune.
Pat Sajak.
I also really like Jeopardy, but
yeah, me too.
I'm not quite as good at Jeopardy. Depending on the categories, I have days on Jeopardy where I'm like, batting 75%, and then I have other days where I'm batting like 10%, and I feel like I don't know anything about anything.
Yeah, I'm the same way on that. Okay, let's kind of revert back to the beginning of our conversation. I think you kind of answered this one already, but quarterback Prentice Air Noland, who's committing on Saturday.
I'm going to say as long as if he's committing on Saturday, I think he's going to pick Ohio State. I have no doubt that Arkansas is sort of the dark horse in this battle to me. Like, they made a really big impression on him and his family when he visited there in March. Texas A&M is talking to some sources around that program. Like, they have some confidence, but I don't know what planet I'm on if a quarterback who has a chance to commit to Ohio State or Texas A&M picks the Aggies after watching their offense a year ago. So,
yeah, that's a good point. Let's do 2 defensive names. I think we would say yes for both the in-state cornerbacks, so I'm not going to go that route.
I still think they're both in, yes.
Okay, well, that's good to know. What about Matter Day, cornerback, Xavier Brown, 4-star, California?
There's something really intriguing about a kid who's making 2 visits to Ohio State from California in 10 days. Like, that is not something you do for fun. That is not something you do just because you like to spend money on airline tickets. I don't know, maybe his dad's a pilot or something. I don't know. But that does not seem like a decision you make lightly, and it does not seem like a decision you make without a purpose. Clearly, Ohio State did a great job showing Xavier Brown what the program is all about on his first visit, enough to the point that he immediately called home and said, "Mom, you got to come out here and check this place out." I'm going to say in. I'm going to say in at this point. I think that he I think he's going to be in. And the crack, Ohio State can finally break the dam at modern day high school that they've been trying to break for a few years.
Good. And he's over my 6 foot threshold because, my obsession with long cornerbacks. So I will gladly take that.
I'd like to see your entire list of like requirements.
Oh, like for
the next show, for the next talking stuff, I would like for you to have a list of your requirements per position.
Okay. Mostly like wide receiver and corner are the ones that I have like strict criteria for, but I can try to create some for other positions because I know everybody really wants to know.
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
Yeah, I mean, I played midget football in like 1992, so I'm pretty educated on the topic. Anyway, one defensive lineman. This is a hard one to say, but I'm just going to throw it out there since the buzz has been happening lately. Washington, D.C., DMV, Dylan Stewart.
I'm still going to say out just because there's a lot to happen between now and June and his official visits. I'm not saying that in a way that I think there's no way Ohio State can win this. This is not a, if he commits to Ohio State, I'll eat my shoe type of situation. And it's not a Keely Ringo type of a deal where I'm like, there's no way this kid's going to Ohio State. I think that there's a real shot to win that battle with everything Ohio State has to offer and the depth chart situation that it is, the proximity to home, Ohio State seemingly making a bigger push on the NIL front and that kind of stuff. But I need a slightly more to feel like they're going to win that battle. But I do think it's very real.
Cool. Good to know. 2025 quarterback committed to Florida today. Jeremiah Smith tweeted him congratulating him. How worried should we be?
I mean, I think Jeremiah Smith is obviously going to not be stopping tweeting anytime soon, and he shouldn't. Ohio State fans also should stop tweeting at Jeremiah Smith unless it's
please do that.
Unless it's something like, "Hey, can't wait to see you back on campus next week for the spring game," and that's really about it. Jeremiah Smith is not going anywhere other than Ohio State as long as Brian Hartline and Ryan Day are at Ohio State. And if that changes in November or December, then by all means, I think it's fine and fair to have some issues or concerns. Until then, when Ohio State has 2 first-round picks at wide receiver again next year, potentially, a third, who knows what else happens. I mean, Julian Fleming, if he's healthy, his athletic profile is enough to turn some heads. That train is not slowing down anytime soon for Brian Hartline and his group. And Jeremiah Smith is the best high school football player in the country without any regard for class or position or anything else. So, Buckeyes fans, my advice to you is simple. Celebrate him and support him and let him know that you guys are not as crazy as it sometimes Twitter makes it out to be. I mean that in the nicest possible way. I love you, but you're crazy.
Yeah, don't tweet him. Yeah. Please.
Just be nice. That's all I got. Just be supportive. Just like you are of the podcast and Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast that Andrew Ellis and myself have just attempted to entertain you with. So hopefully we did just that. I apologize for the mid-show, I don't know what was going on in my throat. I had like a piece of dust or something that was just, it was winning the battle. And I tried my best to overcome it. I did. We soldiered on. So, Andrew and I will be back for another episode of Talking Stuff sometime next week leading up to the Ohio State spring game as we try to preview the visitors list for that and as we break down whatever else is going on around the program in Columbus, where you like to spend your time and money paying attention to their activities. You can join us at ohiostate.rivals.com using promo code DTE30 to get a free month of your subscription, where we talk about all these things and more in the Horseshoe Lounge, the subscriber-only message board. And also, you can get analysis and content from Bill Landis and Austin Ward. And of course, my written stuff there as well. So again, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will see you next time.